Díaz-Canel vowed that Cuba would give our own blood at a very high price. A communist regime 90 miles off of Florida just snarled that on camera, while intel says Havana stacked 300 plus drones from Russia and Iran. And wait until you hear what Marco Rubio tied to Cuba inside the United States. So we're talking about more than 300 military drones, Key West, Guantanamo Bay, and U.S. vessels. It's not some campus socialist fantasy anymore. That's Havana lining up a threat in our backyard while Miguel Díaz-Canel screams about blood and Raul Castro's machine leans on Russia, Iran, and now China for cover. Then Rubio drops the second punch. Cuba matters because it's 90 miles from our shores. And State Department link reporting traced ties to over 50 groups, including the Democrat Socialists of America, the Communist Party USA, and Code Pink. You see, the regime didn't stop at the waterline, it pushed its poison right here. And when a hostile regime sits 90 miles off Florida, I stop ignoring hidden threats, including the ones inside your own body. A 35-year-old man spent months with blurry vision until doctors found a worm moving inside his eye after eating uncooked fish. Now, the World Health Organization tracks parasitic infection prevalence at 1 in 2 affected. And that can look like brain fog, chronic fatigue, pain that won't go away, IBS-like symptoms, even severe chronic conditions. Parasite Purge from Jonathan Otto built a full-spectrum parasite elimination protocol, typical cleanse alternative, using a science-backed parasite formula plus red and near-infrared light therapy for healthy cellular function and natural detoxification processes, with free bonuses like a 10-day intensive parasite detox protocol to prepare your body, support the cleansing process, and maximize your results. Go to purgemyparasitesnow.com and use code NNN45 to save 45% for a limited time. Stop letting hidden invaders dig in. So page 86 names the Democrat Socialists of America and the State Department's new Cuba report. And that's the part I wanted to come back to, because the same left-wing machine that sold this dictatorship as misunderstood now sits in black and white next to Havana's influence web. We're going to go straight to the receipts now. But here we go first to Cuba, declaring that they are ready to fight, willing to give even our own blood and our own lives and pay a very high price. This is Díaz-Canel on camera. Now, I did translate this for you. This is an AI translation. They replicate the voice pattern, but present it in English. So sometimes it gets it, sometimes it doesn't. But this is a pretty good translation, so listen close.
Imperial greed eyes our oil. These are the lands and the natural resources of Venezuela. No, you imperialist gentlemen, this is not your backyard, nor is it any sort of disputed territory. We reject the Monroe Doctrine and any ancient kings for Venezuela, and naturally, also for Cuba. We are willing to give even our very own blood, even our very own lives, but at a very high price. These are not times for half measures. These are times for definitions and for taking a stand against fascism and imperial barbarism. Down with imperialism.
Down.
Down with imperialism.
Down.
Down with imperialism.
Down.
So it wasn't just Castro-style chest thumping from Havana. Now comes the part that matters. Reports Cuba has bought more than 300 kamikaze drones from Russia and Iran. This is breaking news. Cuba purchased over 300 kamikaze UAVs from Russia and Iran. Cuba is finalizing its preparations. So it goes from anti-American rhetoric to real hardware fast. Next, Rubio explains why Cuba sits squarely in the U.S. national security crosshairs just 90 miles off our coast.
administration was talking about how they expected the regime, just to follow up, to see regime change or to see big changes in Cuba, economic, political, by the end of this year. That's what a lot of them were saying.
Who's a lot of them? Who was saying that?
People within the administration who work on this issue.
Like who? Because I work on this issue more than anybody else.
They weren't predicting it, but like there was an expectation that Cuba was so.
No, look, guys. I mean, look, this global affairs are not like. We're not a mini-series, like you get in 3 episodes and it's over. I mean, global affairs are difficult. You're talking about a system that's been in place, since 1959. You're talking about a country that suffered tremendously because of poor leadership and a bad economic model. You're talking about a regime that survived all these years because they had a foreign sponsor, be it the Soviet Union or Hugo Chavez. They don't have that anymore. So, these are complex things that take time, and obviously we're prepared to do what we can do to effectuate a positive change in Cuba because it directly impacts our national security. Cuba matters to us because it's 90 miles from our shores and it has a direct impact on our national security, be it the things they've been involved in the past, the countries they've aligned with in the past and currently, or the threat of mass migration, which is always a risk that you run when countries are as deeply destabilized as Cuba is. It's a failed state. It's a failed state, but I've never laid out any timeline as to what change would look like or when it would happen. I wish it was tomorrow because they deserve it. The people of Cuba deserve a better future.
Mr. Secretary, on your argument.
So Rubio makes the point plainly. Cuba isn't some distant issue. It's a direct threat close to home. In the next clip, he goes even harder, calling the regime's whole system a disaster.
Is the goal still creating regime change through economic collapse, or is the military option?
I think the goal is to have a Cuba where the people of Cuba can experience prosperity, safety, security, and a better life moving forward. The way Cubans are able to do all over the world when they leave Cuba, and we're prepared to be very realistic about how you do that, and patient about how you get in a serious process that leads to that. And we've engaged them from time to time in that regard, and they know where we stand on that issue, and hopefully that's where it arrives. The fundamental problem Cuba has right now is 2 things. Number 1 is their economic system doesn't work because that economic system doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's completely backwards. It just doesn't work, and that's why people have to leave that country. And number 2, they're no longer getting free oil from Venezuela. That's their biggest problem. They're not getting free oil from Venezuela, which, by the way, they weren't using for their power grid. They were taking about 60% of the free oil they were getting from Venezuela and reselling it for cash. So the biggest problem Cuba has is that their regime is a disaster, their economic model doesn't work, and the people who run the country don't know what the hell they're doing. And all they're most interested in is holding on to power. They are afraid of economic prosperity because they are afraid that economic prosperity and economic liberties they will lose control over people. And that's always been the struggle they faced in recent times. But again, look, just today, we began shipping over $100 million of humanitarian assistance to Cuba, which will be distributed by non-governmental entities on the ground. So, we're willing to engage with them. We've engaged with them in the past. We'll keep talking to them about the kind of changes they can make. But this is 90 miles from our shores. This is a government that has spent, a regime that has spent the better part of 30, 40, 50 years destabilizing the region.
So Rubio laying out the communist rule keeps Cubans poor and trapped, but he's also pairing pressure with action. Next, you see the State Department sending humanitarian aid straight to the Cuban people. Here's a post from the Department of State. Earlier today, senior State Department officials joined Catholic Relief to send off the first flight of humanitarian aid following Secretary Rubio's historic commitment of $100 million in humanitarian assistance directly to the Cuban people. So this is the video posted by the State Department. $100 million in humanitarian relief going directly to the Cuban people. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. So that is the America First contrast. Help the Cuban people squeeze the communist rulers. Next, the Capitol Hill clash shows Mike Waltz shutting down the left's excuses for the regime.
Your question?
Yeah, please. But I would like 30 seconds at the end.
During your visit, did you visit the private island from the Castro regime? Did you visit their private jet, which seems to have fuel to go back and forth?
Well, considering you've never been to Cuba, I'm not going to take your advice on where to go. I know, but considering, I mean, you've never been there. I'm not going to tell you how to groom your hair because I can't give good advice on that. I don't think I need your advice at Cuba. Are we going to have a military action against Cuba? It seems like that's what this report is setting up.
I am not going to take options off the table for the President of the United States, but I would hope that you would not allow your visits to be used for Cuban regime propaganda that has oppressed and massacred
I'll tell you, I wish,
people.
I understand, but I would strongly urge you, Marco Rubio, who's never been to Cuba, so many others who have strong opinions.
His entire family is from Cuba, and
they left before the revolution. That is decades ago. That's a ridiculous answer.
It's Cuban Americans who have fled the regime.
To be fair, that is a ridiculous answer.
So he wasn't having the usual soft on Castro nonsense from the left, and now the case gets bigger with a State Department report tying Cuba directly to far-left activism here in America. Matt Whitlock, I'm glad the State Department has created this direct line between the communist government and Cuba and left-wing activity in America.
State Department. Today they published a bombshell report outlining how Cuba, I've known a lot about this, but the fact that it's inside this official report from Secretary of State Marco Rubio is really important. Cuba has spent decades infiltrating the United States. They've sponsored more than 50 groups linked to the national network on Cuba, including the DSA, Communist Party USA, Code Pink. You spend a lot of time tracking these groups and their influence from foreign actors who are adversaries of the United States. What are your thoughts about that report and your kind of top lines of what they found?
For one thing, I think it's so valuable to be able to pull these strings. I'm so glad that the State Department has created this direct line between the communist government of Cuba and left-wing activity in America. We've seen it from China. We've seen it from the Chinese Communist Party. We've seen it now from Cuba. And it's also important to understand that connection there. The fact that Cuba has given harbor to our adversaries like Iran, China, and Russia to then impact the United States. It's why President Trump has made so much of his foreign policy about protecting our hemisphere from letting those threats get inside. And I hope the State Department and the rest of the Trump administration will continue to identify those foreign funding threats that are working against our interests here at home. And there's a lot more to come on that, both from the State Department and from a number of other major reports coming this week that I think will be incredibly valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a hostile regime overseas, it's influence operations aimed right at our own politics. Next, the receipts, including reporting cited by the State Department on DSA's Cuba organizing. An incredible honor to see my City Journal reporting on DSA's Cuba organizing cited in the State Department's new report on Cuba. This person's excited about this. You can find the reference on page 86. I'll link the article and the full report below. Oh.
When I was in Cuba, I was really impressed with everybody's commitment to the revolution and the principles of what the revolution stands for. So I have faith that the people of Cuba will know what a good thing that they have going and want to keep it going and not want to invite neoliberal nonsense to the island.
DSA has really stepped up its involvement in Cuba advocacy and really trying to lean into DSA's strengths.
Cuba has not done any of this state sponsor of terrorism nonsense. And we all know that this is a fake thing. When you go to Cuba, you can also bring supplies that Cubans need.
That's right. Yes, thank you. And when you go to Cuba, you can bring suitcases worth of supplies, which is what we did as DSA when we went to Cuba as well.
Licensing, we probably hold the most export licenses of any organization in the United States, outside of private companies that are shipping to Cuba.
So those clips show exactly how the activist left tried to sanitize and support the communist regime. Now the alarm gets louder with reports of a rapid response network targeting bases, federal buildings, and more if Cuba faces U.S. action. Cuba sleeper agents poised to wage war in California put U.S. on high alert as map of their top target emerges. A plan outlines coordinated nationwide actions within 24 hours if there is an imminent threat or a U.S. military move against Cuba. The National Network on Cuba, which created the Rapid Response Plan, brings together over 50 groups, including the DSA, Communist Party, and Code Pink. Organizers would focus on military bases, recruitment offices, federal buildings, ICE facilities, even sports arenas during big events, according to the documents. And this is from the New York Post. Sleeper agents poised to wage war in California. So if the network is real, this is not foreign policy, it's homeland security. Meanwhile, the next piece shows China throwing its weight behind Cuba and warning Washington to back off. Apparently, China is drawing a line around Cuba. Beijing is now pledging firm support for Cuba. Against U.S. pressure and warning Washington to stop threatening force, China wants a loyal communist foothold 90 miles from Florida, close enough to collect intelligence, project influence, and force America to divide its attention while Beijing prepares for Taiwan. China would never tolerate the United States building this kind of relationship on its doorstep. So Beijing is not defending Cuba out of charity, it's defending a communist foothold near Florida. Next, the threat gets even more direct as reports Havana is using drones against Guantanamo, U.S. vessels, and possibly Key West. U.S. on high alert. Cuba stockpiling 300 military drones from Russia and Iran. Classified intelligence. Havana discussing drone attacks on Guantanamo Bay, U.S. vessels, and Key West.
Potential Cuban drone attack threat. Axios writing, quote, Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and recently began discussing plans to use them to attack the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay, U.S. military vessels, and possibly Key West. But Cuba's foreign minister is denying the claims, writing, without any legitimate excuse whatsoever, the U.S. government builds day after day a fundamental case to justify the ruthless economic war against the Cuban people. Cuba neither threatens nor desires war. This comes as sources tell Fox that the U.S. is preparing to indict former Cuban leader Raul Castro. The CDC is escalating.
Indicted. So that takes us from bad actors and bad alliances to possible strike threats against Americans. Next, the Pentagon's message is simple. Whatever happens, it's preparing for every contingency. Here is the Secretary of War.
What happens with the future of Cuba is in the hands of the President of the United States and the leadership of Cuba. No matter what, the Department of War is going to be prepared and postured for any possible contingency. We're here to talk about that today and then do a little PT. How's that sound?
Amazing. Department of War there. Military says we'll be ready no matter what Havana does. And President Trump puts a name on the target, telling Rubio Cuba could be next on the agenda.
And your next one is going to be, we want to do that special Cuba. He's waiting, but he says, let's get this one finished first. We could do them all at the same time, but bad things happen. If you watch countries over the years, you do them all too fast, bad things happen. We're not going to let anything bad happen to this country.
So Cuba is very much on the table. Next, we shift from presidential talk to report about alleged U.S. war planning and what that could mean. Hormuz Wire says the bombshell alert America. U.S. war planners are secretly greenlighting a massive invasion of Cuba. Thousands of 101st Airborne shock troops poised for a jaw-dropping air assault that could change everything. Details so explosive you would be shocked. And they cite CBS as their source. Their regime is a disaster. The people who run the country don't know what the hell they're doing. Rubio torching the lie Democrats and media hacks carried for years. And when you stack that line next to Díaz-Canel promising blood at a very high price and Havana eyeing drone strikes on Key West, you can see the whole racket naked. The Cuban dictatorship threatens Americans while its U.S. enablers launder communism for them. So Marco Rubio named the Democrat Socialists of America, Code Pink, and Communist Party USA. Now subpoena them. Put every foreign tie on the table. Freeze every channel that fed Havana propaganda into this country. And stop treating communist fronts like quirky activist clubs. Cuba's 90 miles from our shores. Miguel Díaz-Canel just threatened blood on camera. Havana stacked 300-plus drones from Russia and Iran and toyed with strikes on Guantanamo Bay, U.S. vessels, and Key West. So yes, we hammer this hard because this one lands at our front door. So drop your take in the comments. Send this to one person still romanticizing Castro garbage and make them watch Rubio blow the mask off. Their regime is a disaster, and the people running it do not know what the hell they're doing. So Trump and Rubio are tightening the vice while sending aid straight to the Cuban people, not the dictatorship. And that's strength. So Rubio's Cuba exposure is exactly the kind of report that gatekeepers choke on. So text White House to the number on your screen. 844-840-4963. Next News Network is credentialed inside the White House, and the Insider channel sends what our team pulls from inside the building straight to your phone nightly, ahead of the crowd and past YouTube's suppression.